Hi, it's Nico. Welcome to the last play of Shaketember 2023, Antony and Cleopatra. Did you read it? Which edition did you use? Did you watch it? Which version did you watch? I used the Oxford School edition and watched the National Theatre's 2018-19 production via their online streaming platform. I like Ralph Fiennes as Antony. I also liked Ralph Fiennes as Coriolanus. Antony and Coriolanus are very different men, and Fiennes played both roles as if he was Coriolanus and he was Antony. I like the actress playing Cleopatra as well. She managed to make her funny, childlike and vulnerable, which was a pleasant surprise because when I read the play, she just sounded a bit manipulative, to be honest. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with a brief summary and the overall structure of the story. Antony and Cleopatra lived blissfully together in Alexandria in Egypt at the beginning of the play, which is a vile sight to many of Antony's army officers and a vile thought to Octavius Caesar in Rome. As I said, they lived together blissfully, but also very briefly, because by Act 1, Scene 2, Antony has already decided to leave her and Egypt. Act 2 mostly happens in Italy and deals with the situation with Pompey. This Pompey here is the outlawed son of Pompey the Great after Pompey the Great was defeated by Julius Caesar. Now Pompey is causing headaches to the rulers of the Roman Empire, Octavius Caesar, Lepidus and Mark Antony. So Antony goes back to Italy to see to the matter. Two results come out of this trip. The two sides achieve an agreement so that there's no more fighting with Pompey, and Antony agrees to marry Octavius Caesar's sister, Octavia, to strengthen the bond between himself and Caesar. The highest point of Antony's fortune in this play is at a feast on Pompey's barge in the last scene of Act 2, so Act 2, Scene 7. There's solidarity between the two rulers, marriage to Octavia, peace with Pompey, and immediately afterwards in Act 3, Scene 1, a victory in Syria. All is well, except Antony is away from Cleopatra, is the high point of Antony as a Roman. Act 3 has a whopping 13 scenes and a lot of things happen in quick succession. Between Act 3, Scene 4 and Scene 6, Pompey is dead, Lepidus is locked up, Octavia leaves Antony for Caesar. The three people that keep the peace between Caesar and Antony are all gone. Caesar's behavior enrages Antony, Antony's behavior enrages Caesar. War breaks out between them straight away. I only realized recently that Romeo and Juliet and Antony and Cleopatra are the only two tragic love stories in Shakespeare's canon. I thought there must be more, but when I counted them one by one, there aren't any others. There's a similar love story in Troilus and Cressida, but most of the play is about the Trojan War. When I started to put Romeo and Juliet and Antony and Cleopatra side by side, I saw many parallels. Antony and Cleopatra are from two hostile families, not literal families like Montague and Capulet, but in their case two warring nations. The play is mostly set in Alexandria and Rome as two distinct locations. The characters are either Egyptians or Romans. Caesar and the Romans clearly despise the Egyptians, especially the queen, and Cleopatra returns the hatred with equal measure. Romeo and Juliet both use cosmic vocabulary to describe each other. For example, Romeo compares Juliet to the sun. Their love for each other is like worship of the gods. We see the same kind of worshipful love language in Antony and Cleopatra, especially Cleopatra's speech after Antony dies. The couples also have the same ending, not just that they all died, they all commit suicide. Not even just suicide, both couples end their lives in a monument or a tomb. There's also the miscommunication that triggers the death of the man. Romeo thinks Juliet is dead and kills himself. Antony also thinks Cleopatra is dead and tries to kill himself. But Cleopatra turns out not dead, just like Juliet. Within this similarity, though, there's a major distinction. Juliet kills herself to follow Romeo for love. Cleopatra doesn't kill herself only because Antony is dead and now she has nothing to live for. There's another reason. Antony and Cleopatra also get to say a few last words, which I think is an example of terrible communication. It's like a parallel universe where Romeo and Juliet didn't meet each other at that party when they were 14. They went on living normally, grew up, got married, respectively, and then suddenly met in their 30s and 40s. However, that same all-consuming passion that says, "Give me my Romeo," hasn't changed at all. Now, in order to measure their love, they need to find out new heaven, new earth. However, this increase in age and life experience hasn't made their relationship any easier. They are not two teenagers trying to shake off the chains from their families. If they could just escape and be together, they'll be free and happy. Antony and Cleopatra are adults. They don't have to obey or rebel against their parents and families to get together. Moreover, they are the rulers of their worlds. In theory, they can do whatever they like, and for a lot of the play, they do live together and do whatever they like. They have achieved what Romeo and Juliet fought and died for. But it still ends in tragedy. Why? There are many reasons. I'll talk about two specifically in a bit. But on a larger scale, what holds Romeo and Juliet back are external factors. Families and laws of Verona, they don't care about the world. But Antony and Cleopatra do care about the world. They have to now, being adults and rulers. What's holding Antony and Cleopatra back is internal. Although the two worlds, the Romans and the Egyptians, can't stop Antony and Cleopatra from coming together, the nations are just as hostile towards each other as the Montagues and the Capulets. I believe this is one of the key reasons for the tragedy. Antony is caught between the two worlds. The Roman world represented by Octavius Caesar and Rome, and the Egyptian world represented by Cleopatra and Alexandria. We see Antony cross between worlds, interact with both separately in their own location. He himself has two images, one a tough and valiant general, the other a soft and idle lover. He behaves differently depending on where he is and who he is with, but he is not completely comfortable and at peace with either identity. And his desires are at war with each other. He wants Cleopatra and the luxurious and lazy lifestyle in Alexandria, but he also wants to hold on to the land and power from Rome. Caesar and Cleopatra do not meet until the very end. The two worlds collide only after Antony is crushed to death. One character I had never heard of before and now greatly admire is Enobarbus, a follower and friend of Antony from Rome. I like him because he understands people and situations with crystal clear insight and razor sharp intelligence, and he dares speak his mind. He also seems to know and is able to get on with everyone while speaking honestly and daringly. In a world that is full of political tensions, he's completely at ease talking with friends and enemy. When Octavius Caesar and Antony meet up in Rome, Enobarbus greets Caesar's followers like old friends and gives them an elaborate account of Cleopatra's beauty and glory. When they meet Pompey, the rebel, for peace talks, Enobarbus stays behind with a follower of Pompey, and they enjoy a round of ranting about their masters behind their backs. He's able to cross between the two hostile worlds of Rome and Alexandria. He's the first one and often the only one who hears Antony's mind in private. Most of the Romans, from officers to soldiers, despise Cleopatra, and Cleopatra ignores them or hates them as she pleases. But she speaks to Enobarbus just as she speaks to her Egyptian companions, and she asks him for opinions and advice without any formality or ceremony, and she explicitly calls him a friend. Among all the Romans, he's one of the few, if not the only one, who genuinely admires her. You can tell from his famous account of the time when she first appeared on her barge and pursed up Antony's heart upon the river. The color of the throne, the oars, the sails, how the wind and water seem to come alive and adore the barge. The beautiful people that surround her and serve her, I can kind of imagine the scene as a still shot captured in a painting. After that description of a perfect, unapproachable, high and mighty goddess, Enobarbus contrasts it with a surprisingly childlike image of an ordinary young woman from your neighborhood. I saw her once hop 40 paces through the public street, and having lost her breath, she spoke and panted that she did make defect perfection, and breathless pour breath forth. Age cannot wither her, nor custom stale her infinite variety. Other women cloy the appetites they feed, but she makes hungry where most she satisfies. For vilest things become themselves in her, that the holy priests bless her when she is riggish. Riggish means wanton or whorish. This is high praise. The vilest things become themselves in her. Antony says very similar things about her. Fie, wrangling queen, whom everything becomes, to chide, to laugh, to weep, whose every passion fully strives to make itself in thee fair and admired. It's lovely when a man compliments you like that, but we know Antony is hopelessly in love with Cleopatra, so we don't fully believe him. But when Enobarbus says it, I believe him. Partly because Enobarbus is not bewitched, partly because he repeatedly proves to us that he judges people wisely, which makes a stronger case for the charm of Cleopatra. If she's actually a decent, charming woman, why do all the Romans hate her so much? I believe it's because they don't know her. The world of Rome stays separate to the world of Alexandria. No one comes near her except Enobarbus. And Enobarbus loves her because he spends time there and knows her. Actually, Enobarbus is not the only Roman who stands in her presence. Towards the later part of the play, the world of Rome starts to close in on the world of Alexandria. At the very end, there are only two scenes in Act 5. The two worlds collide. Cleopatra and Caesar stand face to face. After calling her a whore, hating her for corrupting Antony, plotting and scheming against her all along, Caesar meets her in person for the first time in Act 5, Scene 1. And just after one meeting, he is able to say, "But she looks like sleep, as she would catch another Antony in her strong toil of grace. She shall be buried by her Antony. No grave upon the earth shall clip in it a pair so famous." So when Caesar sees Cleopatra with his own eyes and gets to know her just for a few minutes, he can understand why Antony would live and die for her. Without exaggeration, Antony literally lives and dies for Cleopatra. At first I thought it's rare and refreshing to see a man so explicit and verbal about how much he loves a woman. But very quickly I felt like there's something unhealthy about this. I like him devoted to Cleopatra, but I don't like him losing all judgment and neglecting his duty. Here's a side though, if you are one of the men who know me in real life, this doesn't apply to you. All the men I know in real life need to show more affection rather than spending more time at work, okay? Back to Antony. This is not the young, dashing, and valiant Mark Antony in Julius Caesar, who stirred the blood of the Roman citizens single-handedly and pressured Brutus and Cassius to committing suicide. The first words we hear from this play? Nay, but this dotage of our generals overflows the measure. This is from a Roman army officer talking to a fellow soldier. They are talking about the dotage of Antony for Cleopatra. This dotage of our generals overflows the measure. According to Johnson's dictionary, dotage firstly means loss of understanding, weakness of mind, or even deliriousness. The second meaning is excessive fondness. Interesting to note, the first words of the play are nay, but. I wonder what's the conversation before that. Maybe one of them says something like, I think our general does love this Egyptian queen very much. And the other officer replies, no, but his love for Cleopatra has overflowed the measure. It has gone too far. It has caused him to lose understanding and make his mind weak. The officer continues to say Antony's eyes used to shine like a war god when he looked at the assembled ranks of soldiers. Now he only looks at Cleopatra's face. Antony's heart used to beat so violently and courageously in the midst of fighting, it could have burst the buckles on his breastplate. Now it goes completely soft to satisfy Cleopatra's fancies. Look where they come. Take but good note. You shall see in him the triple pillar of the world transformed into a strumpetful. Behold and see. Antony is one of the three rulers that governs the Roman Empire at the time. That's what he means by the triple pillar of the world. This is an invitation to the audience to watch and judge for ourselves. Has Antony's love for Cleopatra turned into dotage? Has his love for her overflowed the measure? What consequences will this lead to? Behold and see. Shakespeare shows us many examples of how Antony's love for Cleopatra messes up his judgment in various situations. One most obvious example is Antony's first naval defeat by Caesar, when Antony disgracefully chases after Cleopatra as she flees the battle. The noble ruin of her magic, Antony, claps on his sea wing and, like a doting mallard, a wild duck, leaving the fight in height, flies after her. I never saw an action of such shame. Experience, manhood, honor ne'er before did violate soul itself. When Antony and Cleopatra face each other after this disaster, Antony has the cheek to blame her for his fleeing. Oh, whither hast thou led me, Egypt? See how I convey my shame out of thine eyes, by looking back what I have left behind, destroyed in dishonor. Oh, my lord, forgive my fearful sails. I little thought you would have followed. Egypt, thou knowest too well, my heart was to thy rudder tied by the strings, and thou shouldst tow me after. O'er my spirit thy full supremacy thou knowest, and that thy beck might from the bidding of the gods command me. Oh, my pardon. It's not your fault, woman. And in a war as well, this is not something I want to hear from a military leader, an emperor, or a man. I run away from the front line and the battlefield because my heart was tied to you. It was all your fault. We see the soldiers grumble against him, but he's the noble ruin of Cleopatra's witchcraft. They worship him even when he fails, so they blame Cleopatra instead. But again, we see how Enobarbus responds to the situation fairly. He's devastated by the result of the naval battle, obviously, but he doesn't abuse and blame Cleopatra like other officers do. He's the only one who blames Antony. And in this little conversation, you see the easy relationship without formality between the Egyptian queen and and the Roman officer, as I mentioned earlier. What shall we do, Enobarbus? Think and die. Is Antony or we in fault for this? Antony only. That would make his will, his desire, lord of his reason. What though you fled from that great face of war, whose several ranges frighted each other? Why should he follow? The each of his affection should not then have nicked his captainship, got the better of his captainship at such a point, when half to half the world opposed, he being the myriad question, the sole cause of dispute. 'Twas a shame no less than was his loss, to cause your flying flags chase after your ships, and leave his navy gazing. Well said, Enobarbus. Antony's dotage has overflowed the measure, and I believe this is one of the key reasons for the tragedy. This kind of dotage might cause a certain amount of damage to an ordinary man's daily life. He might lose his phone on a bus daydreaming, or anger his mother by not phoning her for a year. But as a ruler of the Roman world, who is supposed to navigate through delicate political situations, and as a general who commands thousands of soldiers in war, it has disastrous consequences. This dotage eventually leads Antony to commit suicide. When he tries to kill himself, his guard says, "The star is fallen." The star has been falling for a long while. Throughout the whole of Acts 3 and 4, Antony is having an identity crisis. The tragedy of Antony, in a sense, is not mainly that he dies unhappily in the end. The tragedy is to watch a once great man losing himself. I watched Greta Gerwig's Little Women again recently, and Beth said something that was a really fitting description for Antony. It's like the tide. When it turns, it goes slowly, but it can't be stopped. Antony's fortune has turned. It's like the tide going out and cannot be stopped. Here are a few examples. His losing ability as a soldier. Caesar was a child with no experience in war when they fought together against Cassius and Brutus. Yet now he has completely defeated Antony. He feels that authority is slipping through his fingers and he's losing command. Antony sends his children's schoolmaster as an ambassador to Caesar after the defeat. Not long ago, Antony would have ordered kings around and sent them unnecessarily as messengers. Now he only has a humble schoolmaster to send. Like the previous example, here's another mention of what kings used to do for him, but he gets angry because even his own servants wouldn't obey his command now, and he knows he's losing it. He says to his servants, "You have served me well, and kings have been your fellows, but kings don't serve me anymore." And immediately he repeats, "Well, my good fellows, wait on me tonight, scant not my cups, and make as much of me as when mine empire was your fellow too, and suffered my command. But my empire does not obey my command anymore either. He has lost his authority over kings and the Roman Empire." There is a lot of emphasis on the youth of Caesar. Antony, as a middle-aged man, is acutely aware of himself getting old. When he's defeated by Octavius Caesar, he says, "Now I must to the young man send humble treaties." When he wins a battle against Caesar, he says, "Though grey, do something mingle with our younger brown. Yet have we a brain that nourishes our nerves and can get goal for goal of youth." Put simply, we might be getting old and have some grey hair, but we can still win as a young man. He loses the loyalty of many followers to Caesar. His men leave him one by one throughout the play. Ultimately, Caesar wants to alienate Antony and Cleopatra. From Antony, win Cleopatra. He does it obviously for political reasons, but emotionally, this is Antony's weakest point. He's been extremely patient, kind, and generous to his soldiers and officers who betray him. But when it comes to Cleopatra, it's a completely different matter. When his schoolmaster comes back from Caesar, this is the message. Is that his answer? Aye, my lord. The queen shall then have courtesy, so she will yield us up. He says so. Let her know it. To the boy Caesar send this grizzled head, and he will fill thy wishes to the brim with principalities. It's super interesting just to compare those two short speeches of Antony. They are right next to each other. The message literally says that Caesar promises to treat Cleopatra with compassion, provided that she gives Antony up. Antony immediately interprets it as, send this grizzled head, as in this head with grey hair, to the boy Caesar. He emphasizes age twice in direct contrast. Then Caesar will fulfill your every queenly wish. A plain message from Caesar gets elaborated immediately with Antony's greatest fears. He's getting old and he's losing power and glory. Antony is insecure. Will Cleopatra love him and be loyal to him, or will she give him up to the boy Caesar for her own future and safety? The heaviest blow comes when Antony believes Cleopatra has actually betrayed him to Caesar. He becomes really angry. Antony is angry twice in the play, both because he believes that Cleopatra is unfaithful to him. He calls her this foul Egyptian, triple-turned whore, this false soul of Egypt, the greatest spot of all thy sex. The witch shall die. To the young Roman boy she has sold me, and I fall under this plot. She dies for it. Many people have betrayed him by this point, even Enobarbus, but he's not angry with any of them. He's mad with anger here because he's really hurt. It hurts him deep because he really loves her and he thinks he has lost everything to the Roman boy. When his anger is spent, he looks at the clouds in the sky and says, my good knave Eros, now thy captain is even such a body. Here I am, Antony, yet cannot hold this visible shape, my knave. I made these wars for Egypt and the queen, whose heart I thought I had, for she had mine, which whilst it was mine, had annexed unto 1,000,000 more, now lost. She, Eros, has packed cards with Caesar, and force played my glory unto an enemy's triumph. Nay, weep not, gentle Eros, there is left us ourselves to end ourselves. This is way sadder than when he dies in Cleopatra's arms later. I think this is the lowest point in Mark Antony's life. He is defeated, lost, and unloved. He's also losing judgment. Here's an example from my favorite scene, Act 3, Scene 13. Just to be clear, it's not my favorite because it's lovely, but because it's fascinating. This is after the first naval defeat. Antony sends his schoolmaster to Caesar to beg for mercy, but as we have seen, he only gets uncertainty. Caesar does an excellent job of alienating Antony and Cleopatra. Firstly, by sending that message to say the queen shall have courtesy if she will yield you up. Secondly, by sending a messenger called Theseus. Theseus says to Cleopatra, Caesar is merciful and he wants to be your friend. Cleopatra, as the queen of a nation recently defeated, replies submissively and I think politically wisely that, most kind messenger, say to great Caesar this in deputation as my representative. I kiss his conquering hand. Tell him I am prompt to lay my crown at his feet, and there to kneel, till from his all-obeying breath I hear the doom of Egypt. Theseus is very pleased to hear it and thinks he has accomplished his mission. Give me grace to lay my duty on your hand. As Theseus kisses her hand, Antony storms in, sees it, immediately asks Theseus to be whipped. I thought, poor guy, it's probably because Antony thinks Cleopatra is doing business with the enemy behind his back. But not quite. He says the reason 3 times. Moon and stars, whip him. Were it 20 of the greatest tributaries that do acknowledge Caesar, should I find them so saucy with the hand of she here? While Theseus is whipped off stage, Antony turns his fury to Cleopatra and abuses her, saying really hurtful things by digging up her history with previous lovers. Wherefore is this? To let a fellow that will take reward and say God quit you, be familiar with my playfellow, your hand, this kingly seal, and plighter of high hearts. You let an inferior person kiss your hand. It's mine. No one else is allowed to touch it. After Theseus is whipped, Antony says, If that thy father live, let him repent thou wast not made his daughter, and be thou sorry to follow Caesar in his triumph, since thou hast been whipped for following him. Henceforth the white hand of a lady fever thee, shake thou to look on it. You are whipped because you follow Caesar. From now on, seeing the white hand of a lady will put you into a sweat and make you tremble. What logic? Theseus is whipped not because he follows Caesar. Enobarbus betrays Antony and follows Caesar. Antony sends all his money after him. Theseus is whipped because his lips touch the wrong hand. Enobarbus is extremely sharp. As soon as Antony sees Theseus kissing Cleopatra's hand, Enobarbus has an aside to the audience, you will be whipped. And Antony immediately follows with, take hence the jack and whip him. And immediately after that, Enobarbus talks to us directly again. 'Tis better playing with a lion's whelp than with an old one dying. Antony is an old lion dying. He's angry, he's frustrated, he fights and he fails. It's really hard to watch. But to be ruthless for a moment, as a ruler, a defeated ruler, if he still possesses any sense and judgment, would he whip the messenger from the victor on whom his survival depends, let alone for a pretty legit reason of kissing the hand of a queen? This is not the only case of Antony losing judgment. This kissing of Cleopatra's hand comes back in Act 4, Scene 8, which shows again how he cannot judge situations correctly. Antony has an officer called Scarus who witnesses Cleopatra's fleeing ships and pours some of the vilest names and curses on her in Act 3, Scene 10. In Act 4, Scene 8, the same Scarus wins a victory for Antony, and as they come back to Alexandria, Antony says, Behold this man. Antony asks Cleopatra to look at Scarus. Command unto his lips thy favouring hand. Kiss it, my warrior. He has fought today as if a god, in hate of mankind, had destroyed in such a shape. Now, Antony's giving her hand out for his soldier to kiss as a reward. Would Scarus appreciate the honor? Scarus fights for him, Antony, the fearless warrior who might have been the idol of Scarus since he was a child. He's a Roman and he hates this Egyptian woman for the naval defeat, for bewitching his general, for his downfall. He is probably disgusted having to kiss her hand. But Antony thinks it a great honor. The tide of his fortune goes out unstoppably. Antony is an old lion dying. Shakespeare uses the term fortune for this downfall. The word appears in the play nearly as often as the word love. But at the end of the day, what is fortune? Is it something that goes up and down as it wishes and is out of our reach and control? Is Antony's tragedy inevitable because that's his fortune? Where does one's free will come in? This is officially the last video for Shaketember 2023. I only twigged recently that all 3 plays we chose for this Shaketember were tragedies. Last year, the three hosts chose a Roman tragedy, a comedy, and a problem play, which was a more balanced menu. If Jason, Kelly, and I get to do this again next year, I'm sure we can take this into consideration. Did you enjoy Shaketember this year? Let me know if you succeeded in picking up Shakespeare this month for the first time, full stop, or since school, or a long time ago. What's your experience like? In terms of the format, are there anything we can improve on? I'd love to hear from you. Remember to watch Jason and Kelly's video on Antony and Cleopatra. That's all for today from me. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in my next one.